Now, you may not have seen it too much in the headlines, but a crisis is unfolding in northern Africa. The UN says $4.4 billion is needed to stop a famine catastrophe with 20 million people facing starvation. Well, I'm joined in the studio now by the Minister for International Development, Rory Stewart. He's also the man who knows better than almost anyone why the Conservatives won in Copeland. As a neighbouring MP, you spent a lot of time on the campaign trail there. Hello, Chief. Thank you for being with us this Sunday morning. Let's talk about Copeland first. You spent a lot of time there. Do you think that the Conservatives won because of satisfaction with what they were doing, or was it really more about dissatisfaction with Labour?
Well, my sense is it was probably three things. A lot of people on the doorsteps genuinely seemed to feel that Theresa May was doing a tough job and doing it well. Secondly, there was a lot of support for Trudy Harrison, who was our local candidate. She was born in the local hospital, 4 children born in the local hospital. Husband worked as a welder at Sellafield, which is the biggest employer in the constituency. And the third thing was a sense that Labour, which has really had that seat for nearly 100 years, almost without a break, hadn't really delivered over the past century.
You talk there about the sense that Labour hadn't delivered. It clearly has been a very difficult week for the Labour Party, losing Copeland. The polls continue to be pretty dismal for the party. With Brexit coming up, one of the big challenges for Parliament, do you think that it's bad for democracy to have an opposition that's in such disarray?
I think it is healthy for democracy to have a strong opposition. I definitely believe that. And I think a lot of the Labour voters that I saw on the doorsteps were genuinely in despair. They just don't feel that the Labour Party was speaking for them. So I met many Labour voters who were voting Conservative because they thought the Conservatives could deliver and their traditional party wouldn't.
And what do you think that means for democracy then, for scrutiny of Brexit?
Well, it means that until an effective opposition comes in, the Conservative Party is going to have to be very disciplined and self-critical and make sure that we really focus on getting out and listening to people.
You talk about the need for the Conservative Party to be self-critical. Today we learned that Lord Heseltine is saying that in the Lords he is prepared to back a motion that says that Parliament should get a veto on any final Brexit deal. You're someone who supported Remain. As an independent thinker, you must think that actually that parliamentary scrutiny might not be such a bad thing.
Well, I disagree with Lord Heseltine on this, and respectfully disagree with Lord Heseltine. We had a vote on Brexit, which just happened, went through a very simple piece of legislation, unamended. Prime Minister's promised another vote at the end of this process. And I think it's really important, particularly at the moment when, as you say, people are very sceptical about democracy, that we show real respect for the referendum.
Now, with your hat on as International Development Minister, let's talk about what's happening in North Africa at the moment. On Monday, a famine was declared in South Sudan. Somalia, Nigeria and Yemen also in real danger. 20 million people could starve. What is the government planning to do?
I think the first thing is just to see the scale of this problem. So famine was something that we had hoped had become a thing of the past. Since 2000, in the 21st century, there's only been one famine, which was in Somalia in 2011. We now have the risk that 4 are going to hit us simultaneously. And this is millions of people. At the moment, we have a situation in South Sudan where there are 200,000 people who are in risk of dying from starvation.
So what's the UK government going to do now?
So we're putting support into all those countries. So we will put about £100 million into Somalia, about the same into South Sudan, and similar figures into Yemen and into Nigeria.
Because it does sound like relatively small amounts of money when you consider that the UN says $4.4 billion is needed, and you're talking about a few hundred million.
It's true. So the UK has to work with other partners. We are the major donor at the moment, and we move very quickly, so we were able to produce the money within a day of the UN asking for it, and we're lucky to be able to do that because UK taxpayers have very generously supported this. But you're absolutely right. We can only get support if all countries come together. That's the US, that's Europe, that's Japan. Other wealthy countries need to contribute. Britain is not going to be able to do this on its own. There
will be some people who think that perhaps Britain should be doing even more. If you look at the way that our aid money is distributed, relatively less poor countries such as Pakistan, India and China do get aid from the UK. We can have a look now at what the new Indian High Commissioner has said this week. If British aid suddenly stopped, would it make a huge difference? No. I mean, there will be people who think, look, aid money should be going on things like famine, people starving. Why are we giving money to countries that have their own space programmes and that are saying that they don't really need it?
So firstly, Sophie, we absolutely agree. We absolutely believe our priority is humanitarian stuff. We're no longer giving traditional aid to India for exactly these reasons. We provide some technical assistance. We look at opportunities to help rebuild Indian cities, which incidentally provides opportunities for British businesses. But our core activity at the moment has to be providing food, shelter, basic education, and dealing literally with people who will starve to death. When this happened in Somalia in 2011, just to take it out of the politics, 125,000 children died in about 2 weeks from not having enough food to eat. So that is absolutely our priority.
Another country where famine could soon be declared is Yemen. Now, while the UK is giving money to Yemen, it's also selling arms to Saudi Arabia, who are then potentially using those arms to bomb some of the civilians who are getting that aid. I mean, you can't think that's defensible, surely.
So, Sophie, all these situations are different. But in Yemen, we have to remember that what's happened is a rebel group has displaced the legitimate government. This is the Houthis coming from the north. There's a UN-mandated intervention, so the Saudis are there with a UN mandate. And the chaos and the anarchy that we are facing in Yemen and we're trying to support is driven primarily by these rebel groups that have devastated that country, driven out a legitimate government, and created a situation where frequently those groups in Sinai are not even giving permits to UN workers and humanitarian workers to get into areas where people are starving.
Now, I'm also interested to talk a bit more generally about world affairs. You're someone who's been in the British Army, you've worked at the diplomatic services, you walked across Afghanistan, clearly someone with very keen interest in foreign affairs. Now, we have the terrorism watchdog today saying that the terror threat is at a level not seen for a generation. Are you worried that with Islamic State losing ground in Iraq and Syria that they'll turn their attentions to targeting countries like the UK?
Well, first, we have to get a balance. There's no point unnecessarily worrying people. It's really important to understand that we have some of the very best intelligence and security services in the world. But it's also true, of course, that the Islamic State is a terrifying phenomenon. They drew in nearly 40,000 foreign fighters from over 120 different countries into that area between Iraq and Syria. And that, incidentally, is another reason why we need international development programs, why we need a foreign
office. So do you think that
the
terror threat is increasing then?
Absolutely, because as they're squeezed, the risk is that they're going to increasingly focus on countries like Britain. And what we saw in Brussels and what we saw in the south of France and what we've seen elsewhere is about the Islamic State responding to its territory being crushed in Iraq and Syria and going elsewhere. But again, to reassure people, that's why we have one of the best intelligence and security services in the world.
And then just finally, a quick thought.
But also why the public needs to be very vigilant, because this is only going to work with the public helping us.
Finally, a quick thought on Donald Trump. Do you think the new US president is making the world a safer place?
I think my real confidence in him rests in people like General Mattis and General McMaster, who's the new national security advisor. These are very smart people who I've worked with before in the world, in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think they're sensible, serious, and they are doing the right things.
OK, very diplomatically answered. Rory Stewart, thank you.
Thank you.